What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here. Hope you guys are having a good Wednesday. And we thought we'd do a special live today because if you guys haven't been paying attention, very recently, the federal Liberals, Justin Trudeau, just announced what his housing platform was going to be. And it's definitely causing a bit of a stir in the world of real estate. So that's what we're going to be getting into. We've also got a special guest that's going to be joining me in a little bit. So our resident GTA realtor, Emma Pace, will be jumping on. But first, I thought I'd really quickly just share with you guys a high level. This probably isn't going to be a great high level explanation, but we'll start there. So I'm going to do my screen share. You guys should see this. And so essentially what I'm on right now is just the liberal.ca website. And if you guys want to check out all the different aspects of the new housing program, really encourage you guys to go there first. You can read up on it. Essentially, it seems like they're trying to hit on about 16 different points here. And so each one you can kind of jump into and learn a little bit more about. But definitely one of the big things that was making headlines over the last 24 hours, it seemed like, was one of their proposals in regards to how Canadians sell their houses. So essentially, they're proposing a auction system which would kind of, get rid of what we call the blind bidding process that we currently have. But I think we've got our guest Emma ready, so I'm going to stop my screen share. I'll come back and I've got some articles I'll share with you guys later. But I know Emma's on a schedule, so we'll get Emma up here. And hey, Emma, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. So before we even jump into maybe some hot takes in regards to what's going on with the proposed Liberals plan, I'd love to just hear maybe if you could summarize for us, what is the blind bidding process that we currently have in real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. So for anybody that's been competing in multiple offers, we'll say in Toronto, the process typically looks like one. And just so everybody knows, it's actually under our REBA regulations as agents that we are not allowed to disclose the details of any offers if multiple offers come in. All right. So our job as agents is to keep everybody informed as to the total number of offers in the event that there's multiple offers that come in on a property. We are not allowed to disclose any of the details, price, closing date, anything like that. So any of the specifics it's completely blind. You will not know as a buyer what other buyers have submitted to the seller, right? And so it is common to see if let's say a seller has set an offer night for this evening, at 5:30. You might receive an email as an agent at 1 o'clock saying, hey, this is how we intend to proceed with the offer this evening. Here is the preferred closing date. Here are all the items that the seller requests. If you can make those things happen for us, fantastic. And if you can't, bring us your best offer and what would work for you. So you have no idea if there's 10 offers that come in. Are 6 of them bringing the closing date that the seller wants, and 4 of them have a higher price than what you're willing to put in, but they don't have the availability to kind of meet the closing date that the seller was looking for. So the entire process is essentially bring me an offer. You have no idea who the other or what the contents of all other buyers' offers are, and the seller has the opportunity to choose the offer that suits their personal situation best and move forward with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really appreciate you breaking that down. And then, so I guess, again, I don't think they necessarily shared a ton of details, but with our interpretation of what the new auction system would be like, do you mind maybe just touching upon at least what maybe your opinion or what you've heard from other realtors in regards to their understanding?
Yeah, so there honestly haven't been very many details, right? It was basically a blanket statement, so it would be very difficult for anybody to say what will actually transpire of the statement that was made. But ultimately, the goal would be to provide more transparency in the marketplace as to what the pricing would be for other offers. Okay, so for instance, in Australia, they utilize this process, but it's actually not for a lot of the properties that get sold. I think with the research that I've done, it's actually less than 10% of the properties in Australia that are actually auctioned off. However, The theory behind it is the same thing as you showing up at Sotheby's and putting an offer in on a watch. I'm willing to pay $1, Matt pays $2. If Matt's willing to pay $2, maybe I come back and I'm willing to pay $3, right? And so there is more transparency in the marketplace as to what the pricing is, because like I said before, with our current offer strategy, there is no transparency. You have no idea what the other offers are. However, because there is no framework around how this auction process could work, I think it sounds great in theory. Like on paper, it sounds amazing because every buyer would know exactly what's going on. However, a real estate transaction has more variables than me and Matt trying to buy a watch. At the end of the day, the seller wants to get the highest price for the watch, and it is what it is. The one variable would be the price point. When we take into consideration, there are going to be some sellers out there that look at their property as a commodity on the marketplace, and the only thing that they care about is price point. There are also going to be other sellers out there that have lived in their property for 50 years and have raised generations of their family in their homes and celebrated every Christmas there. And pricing is important, but maybe who the property goes to is more important than the price to them, right? And so it really is hard to determine what could be the right strategy, given the fact that there's so many different variables that come into play. And if a homeowner is being dictated how they should be selling their home just on one variable in a very complex scenario, it's hard to determine if that's actually the right situation for the bulk of the parties that are out there.
Yeah, really appreciate you summarizing. Again, obviously, we don't know exactly how this would be implemented if it was to be implemented, but I guess I'd love to just kind of comment a little bit on one of my perceived concerns. And then I'd also love to bring up, it seems like in general, the Canadian Realtor Association and the Ontario Realtors Association, at least the first take seems like they're not overly impressed with this proposal, but we'll get back to that in a second. So when we're thinking about the auction process, in theory, for me as an investor, I actually prefer that doesn't sound like a terrible thing. I'll figure out how to adapt to this. But I think one thing we need to really understand is for the retail buyer, the average consumer that wants to buy a house to live in, this isn't just like a pure financial decision for them. And it's actually a very emotional decision. And one of the things where my brain naturally goes to is like, I can just see people getting caught up in that heat of the moment almost, right? We're like, oh, like just another $500, I'll just go $500 more. Just another $500, I'll do another $500 more. And I could see how this could essentially result in actually higher prices being paid, because the most emotional person, assuming that they've got the bankroll to back them, they can just keep going up. Whereas in the blind bid process, it was pretty rare that realtors would come back more than once to people to be like, hey, if you want to tighten up your offer, if you want to literally submit the absolute best, cleanest offer, and that would often be kind of the last discussion. At least I'm not familiar with a lot of like, I'm coming back to you for the 10th time. Is this definitely the last highest, best price in terms you can give me? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you, Matt. I think, again, I think in theory, the intention behind an auction-based process for real estate, the intention is good, but I don't actually think the outcome and the practicality of what that process looks like is going to accomplish what the set target is. The set target of this process is to help make housing more affordable. And I would agree with you in that I don't think that that is going to make housing more affordable. I think we're going to end up being in the same situation that we're in right now. When I think the auction processes could be great for buyers, but it's not great for sellers, right? Or could not be great for sellers. But I just think ultimately the fundamental issue that we have, and the reason why housing prices continue to increase, is because we just don't have enough supply. And so we keep dancing around and like making all of these excuses or, hypothetical situations that could help the housing market and make it more affordable. But I don't think, whether it's blind bidding or an auction-based process, I don't think we're actually targeting the root of the problem, which seems to be a supply issue. And so, again, I think it's a great theory on paper. I think in some situations it may produce an amazing outcome, but I also think that there's going to be a lot of situations in which, it's the lesser of two evils at the end of the day. I think people are going to say it's great for now, and then we start to go down that rabbit hole, and they go, okay, this wasn't as great as we kind of expected that it was going to be.
Yeah, and so in general, do you mind summarizing what it seems like a lot of realtor associations, what their kind of position or their perspective on this is?
Yeah, so I actually have the email here. So I'll just kind of go through the details of the email that we received yesterday, and this is from OREA, so the Ontario Real Estate Association here. And so they basically said, "Dear Emma, today the Liberal Party of Canada announced their housing plan in the 2021 Canadian election. Under the plan, they're proposing to use the Criminal Code of Canada to ban the use of blind or traditional offer processes for home sales. This proposed change would criminalize a homeowner's right to sell their home how they want, essentially mandating forced housing auctions for all Canadians. OREA and all Canadians are rightly concerned about the rising home prices and the shortage of new listings and new homes in Canada. But we cannot fix Canada's housing crisis by denying millions of hardworking families the choice on how they'd like to sell their homes and pitting homeowners against buyers. While we're pleased to see that all federal parties come forward with a policy to address the housing crisis, this proposed change is a dangerous erosion of the rights of Canadians to buy and sell properties. We encourage you to talk to your local candidates and discuss this issue online to raise awareness about why this divisive plan will make our housing crisis worse." Right? So there are concerns because at the end of the day, it is very tough to say how a seller should be mandated to sell their property, especially when you haven't rolled out a very comprehensive plan. You've just said, we want you to auction off your house. Okay, well, you haven't indicated, is the seller required to take the highest price? Some of the concerns that, I'm sure that if there's a lot of buyers on here, they go, this is great, more transparency, but is it an invasion of your privacy to say, this is how much money I have and this is what I'm willing to put out there publicly? How can you determine, again, all of the other variables such as closing costs, conditions, all of these kinds of things in just a public auction? Or you just have people yelling at each other saying, I'm willing to give you this, or I'll take off my condition. There has to be some a systematic process. And so I actually would agree in some regards that there probably should be some more structure. And I do think there actually should be more transparency in the real estate market. But I don't, my personal opinion is that I don't think that they're actually addressing the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Is there a way that they could, again, like you had mentioned before, Matt, could they regulate the current bidding process to be, could it be more regulated? It doesn't mean that we have to disclose information or information about other buyers and what they're willing to offer. But for instance, in London, I actually find London does an amazing job of the multiple offer situation where they'll actually write in the listing, we're going to give you 2 rounds. Everybody's going to have the opportunity to come back. Right? Twice. In Toronto, agents set their own rules. Hey, we'll let some people come back for a 3rd round and sometimes we won't. Right? And it's very difficult because every single time you have to talk to the agent and say, well, what's your strategy? What does your seller want to do? Right? Maybe there is some regulation where you go, all right, well, you can only have a maximum number of rounds to continue to make these improvements. But it's a tough balancing act when our fiduciary duty as agents is to get sellers the highest price, right? And so, if it is as an agent in my client's best interest and they signed with me and my job is to get them the most amount of money and there's no rules and regulations, then is an agent actually doing right or wrong by their client by continuously asking for more money? That's technically what we're hired to do, and that's what our contract is with the sellers.
Yeah. And I think one of the things to really break down here is, what were the intentions behind it versus what's going to be the actual impact. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head there. From my perspective, if you were to give me a magic wand, whatever, if you want, let's make it an option. Let's literally just have the consumers decide, hey, I can check a box and decide I want blind offers, or I can check a box and decide that I can do this auction version as the seller. I think it's really interesting, though, how we seem to frame sellers as bad. Like politicians seem to frame sellers as bad, where buyers are good, these poor buyers. But like at the same time, realistically, that seller's going to sell that house and probably go and try and buy another house. And so like you're in theory potentially doing them a disservice by not giving them choice. But I think the bigger thing is how people buy the house isn't actually going to change affordability in any meaningful manner. And so for me, again, oftentimes the first answer you hear is build a ton more houses. And I think that that's a step in the process, but that's not actually the silver bullet that's going to solve all the problems either. I think you really do need a two-tiered approach. First, you need to become very lax on zoning regulations. So the same people that will probably applaud this liberal proposal are also the people that will freak out if someone builds a garden suite on one of their neighboring properties, right? And that sort of NIMBYism often gets overlooked, but that actually is far more detrimental, because if we actually want to create affordable houses, either for someone to house hack in and be able to afford to live there, or just affordable apartments, that's actually the fastest solution, is to become more lax on zoning, allow intensification in larger urban centers, and then again, go on a building spree. That building spree, realistically, due to the cost of inputs and replacement costs, it's not going to all of a sudden like make houses $100,000 again. But if you allow people to chop and slice and dice up existing buildings into smaller units, if you allow people to convert commercial and office space into residential, if it makes more sense, that will actually create a lower price point there. And other people will choose to go into these new, more expensive builds. And I think that that's how you could actually try and get more of a balance, because I'll get into it afterwards, because I know you got to drop off, Emma. But a lot of the other proposals from the liberals, I'm like, that's going to make it more expensive. If you let people borrow more money, that's going to make it more expensive. If you give a rent-to-own program, it's going to be more people trying to buy. None of these things are actually really going to solve the underlying problems. So would love, just if you want to riff or take a hot take on in regards to what are some real life solutions you think could work.
I also agree with you, and I also just want to echo what you said, because my whole thing around looking at, to be honest, not even necessarily just the Liberals' plan. I think if I look at all parties' proposals, what they're claiming is solving affordable housing. But what many of the plans actually are is providing temporary accessibility to housing. It's not necessarily creating affordable housing. It's providing accessibility currently through temporary means, that essentially what ends up happening is we're just kicking the can down the road for other people to deal with it. You know what I mean? And at the end of the day, yes, we might be able to implement something for the next short term that allows more people to be able to access housing and to purchase housing, but it doesn't actually address the problem of affordability. It's a difference between affordability and accessibility, really.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you and I was actually having this conversation with Mitt and Jeff yesterday evening. And one of the things that we had discussed is that to your earlier point about being more lax and being able to actually increase housing stock, both on the purchase side of things, but also on the rental side of things. Right now, in many instances, it costs you the exact same to rent and to purchase if you've got a down payment, right? And so it makes it extremely difficult if the rental costs are so high, because how can you continue to save for housing? Like, yes, it's fantastic if we have a $40,000 TFSA or whatever, a housing, like a tax-free housing account. That's great. But if you don't have any money to put in the account because you're squeezed every single month, then that's not really an effective solution. So I think at the end of the day, we do need to become more lax. We do need to address the supply issue and see what we can do in that regard. It's not a silver bullet. Again, it's a complex thing. This isn't just like a very simple solution that we can toss out there and something's going to fix it. But I think the way that it is being positioned is we're being sold something, and the outcome is going to be no different than what we're seeing today. Right. And so I think that it's just really important for people to kind of see past I'm going to make this promise to you and it sounds great. Again, the auction thing does sound great in theory. There's a lot of, on paper, it looks amazing. But when you actually kind of peel back the curtain and you go, this might seem cool for the first couple of months, and then we realize we're in the exact same position that we're in today. It didn't actually really solve anything. It just created a different issue for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really appreciate you sharing your perspective. And I guess I know you got to go. So any other last words before we let you drop off here in regards to just when thinking about the housing crisis, the rental crisis, the proposed solutions?
Yeah, I just think, it's important to also understand that, like, hey, some people are probably going to come back and say a part of these plans does include to increase housing stock. The Liberals want to create, what was it, 1.4 million new homes over 4 years. I can't remember the Conservatives. I think it was around 1 million. It's around the NDP, 500,000 affordable homes in the next 10 years. They sound like really big numbers, but what's really important to understand, guys, is if we look at the 2021 to 2023 immigration plan, we're talking 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
The immigration plan on the low end is 950,000 people to Canada, and on the high end, 1.2 million. So it sounds great that we're building all of this housing, but we kind of have to hope that they already have that plan, because if they don't, we're going to have a way bigger issue in 5 years. Like, unfortunately, the plan sounds great, but we're already way behind where we need to be. So, 1,500,000 new homes over 10 years, like, that's not going to cut it, guys. Like, we're not even close to, our projections in terms of immigration that's coming to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these people are going to need places to live. So it sounds great, but we kind of need to peel back the layers a little bit more to understand, like, some of the fundamentals, and that there's a little bit more kind of going on. So do a little bit of your own research, and you have to do what's best for you. At the end of the day, you got to vote for the party that you think is, best aligned with your personal goals and your beliefs and whatnot. But I just think that there's a lot of loose terminology being tossed around, and I don't necessarily think that there are going to be the outcomes that people are kind of hoping for with what has been proposed.
Yeah. And just commenting on that concept of we're going to create 500,000, 1 million, whatever the arbitrary number is. And it's pretty arbitrary, in my opinion. When you guys look back on past promises from politicians, the amount of money spent versus the number of units actually created, it seems like we very consistently fall short of the more loftier goals set out when campaign promises are being made versus then when reality of politics comes into play once it comes down to the day-to-day operations. So again,
and I was going to say just one last thing too, Matt, is they obviously have this proposal for flippers, right? And again, like you had mentioned before, like sellers seem to get this kind of bad rap, and flippers also seem to get this bad rap. However, if we're looking and we're just going to say, okay, the government is going to make 500,000 new pieces of housing, okay? Mm-hmm. But we're going to limit flippers. It's really important to understand, like, most of the buyers that we deal with, they don't have extra capital for renovations. They need to buy something turnkey, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're likely not going to be competing on the same properties that flippers are competing for. And flippers are actually creating inventory for the marketplace to be able to purchase up that they wouldn't otherwise be able to purchase. Like, I think the bulk of the flippers that both you and I know, Matt, are actually creating safe housing, better neighborhoods, that kind of thing. But they get a bad rap because, like, oh, people are making money off housing. Yeah, but they're buying properties that most buyers would not otherwise touch because they don't have the experience and they don't have the capital. So they're actually creating additional housing for you to be able to actually look at and to live in, where you otherwise wouldn't have that. So it goes kind of like, it goes a couple layers deeper. You can't just say someone's bad for doing something. There are great flippers. There are also, like, terrible flippers. There are great real estate agents. There are terrible real estate agents. But I just think that, like, to your point, if we just look at the numbers that the governments toss out as an arbitrary number for this is how much housing we're going to create, or we look at, hey, if we did make policy a little bit more lax to allow people to create additional housing stock, does that 500,000 number now turn into 3 million because the small guys are doing it? It's not necessarily the institutional guys that have to do it. And we're providing people alternative means to get other forms of housing out there. Like, I think there's also something else there. So I would agree with you in that regard.
Yeah. Really appreciate you sharing that, Emma. We'll let you drop off, and I'm about to go on a rant in regards to my thoughts on the flipper situation as well. So again, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and insight, Emma. And reminder, guys, if you guys haven't seen Emma on the channel in the past, she's actually here every single month breaking down for us the statistics and facts in regards to the GTA market. And she's often going deep into what's going on with GTA condos for us. So again, I always appreciate those updates, Emma.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. See ya. And so, guys, what I want to kind of touch upon with the flipping situation here is, and I've got a couple of tweets that I might share with you in a second as well, but I think there's an oversimplification when people are thinking about being able to, let's just ban flipping or let's put another tax on flipping. One, you understand that the flippers, they're just going to pass that tax along to the end consumer, right? So that's one, that's not actually going to just be a magic bullet. Two, at least for a segment of the properties flippers buy, they're not mortgageable, right? A lot of the properties that we wholesale or that the flippers in our network are buying, they're in really rough shape. And they're not considered mortgageable because they don't have a functioning bathroom or a functioning kitchen, or the roof has a hole in it. And so you literally can't go and use your, first-time home buyer's credit. You can't go use your RSP type of financing to be able to buy that property. You can't do the 5% down because of the fact that, hey, they won't insure it. The big 5 banks, the big 6 banks, they won't insure that sort of, or they won't mortgage that sort of property. And so it's really important to understand that it's not like flippers are literally stealing properties from first-time home buyers, because if they are stealing the properties, they then immediately turn around and resell it. That's the whole goal of a flipper. So if you see them as maybe some unnecessary middleman, I think you need to take a step back and really think through, because also a lot of home buyers, they want turnkey. If they didn't want turnkey, if they all wanted to fix up properties, then flippers wouldn't have a business model. They wouldn't have demand for their products. So let's pull up this screen share again. And I forget which one of the Steves or Stevens had a good point on this. Let me just find it. So, yeah. So Steve here, I thought he had a great thread. Always love seeing his tweets as well. So going to encourage you guys to jump over and follow him on Twitter. But let's just dive into it. The vast majority of buyers target move-in ready homes. Why? Because they don't have the time or expertise to tackle a major renovation and don't have the cash to do it. You can't mortgage a renovation. This is also a big point that a lot of people overlook. You understand, if you buy that, whatever, let's call it a $350,000, $400,000 real fixer-upper here in London, Ontario, you might have to dump $100,000 into it. Well, if that first-time home buyer is struggling to come up with the 5 to 20% down to buy the property, you can sure bet they're going to struggle to come up with the renovation funds as well. Whereas when you buy the property fixed up, you actually get to finance the renovations, right? So let's just run through some basic math here. Actually, maybe he even does it in his thread. So people see HGTV shows and big profits, but in reality, it's a low margin, high risk business. House flipping is a dirty word, but in many cases, they are undergoing major renovations, preserving existing housing stock, and taking a lot of risk in the process. And there is risk involved with becoming a flipper. It's not just a guaranteed money printing machine. I've met a lot of flippers that lose a lot of money, get discouraged, and eventually quit. So again, this idea that they're somehow, just being predatory on the market, I think really is an oversimplification. And the other factor is some of the flippers, some people like us that are really going after those dilapidated buildings. Well, those properties will otherwise just kind of rot and deteriorate. And then eventually someone will come in, bulldoze them, and do an infill project, or often that lot sits vacant for an extended period of time. This preserving of the existing housing stock, I think, is a really important point when we're thinking about flipping. So I think Steve walks us through a bit of an example here. So for example, original condition house in East Vancouver. Now, this is going to get crazy because we're using Vancouver prices, guys, just buckle up, but is 1.6 million, 320,000 down payment for the house, 250 to 300,000 for the full renovation. That's over $600,000 in after-tax money needed, not to mention 6 months of additional holding costs while their home is under construction. This is actually a really important point. that under construction, right? That first time home buyer, what are they going to do? They're going to buy the fixer up, fix it up over the course of months while still renting out where they currently live. Again, that's actually going to put a much greater stress on their financial situation than simply thinking that they're going to be able to, handle all these different spinning plates that they're dealing with. And so let me see. Does Steve pick up the thread? Maybe that's where it ended. But anyways, I think it's really important to sit down and think about the consequences here, because so much of the stuff sounds good on the surface, but then when you dig a little bit deeper into it, it turns out that, oh, hey, there's a lot of politics going on here. So for example, different Stephen, but another great Stephen, both of them have laser eyes. That's usually just a sign that someone's smart, but that's just my opinion. So I really like this point here, and a few people or a few pundits have been pointed out, but remember like 3 months ago when Trudeau voted against banning kind of foreign buyers for a period of time to try and help the housing market cool? I'm not saying that banning foreign buyers is a good idea. In fact, I don't think it is. I think that, free markets in general, when truly free, they work themselves out. But Holly Doan was sharing here, Liberals promised ban on all new foreign purchases of residential real estate for 2 years. Justin Trudeau and cabinet voted against a similar conservative motion in our Commons on June 9th. This really feels just like political grandstanding, in my opinion. And also this was another great one, this rent-to-own scheme that they're proposing. It kind of sounds similar to the rent-to-own sort of things that were going on in the United States right before the housing crash. I think that when you take a step back here, guys, and you really look at what's being proposed, it literally is just pandering towards the masses in the hopes that we can buy votes. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that the NDP, the Conservatives, or any political party is going to have a magic silver bullet that's going to solve all of our housing crisis. It's not going to happen that way. And so it's important that we understand that I think it actually is going to come down to the local, regional level. We need municipalities to get rid of this fucking NIMBYism. We need to allow a lot more growth, and we need to allow intensification as well. But that's not just new growth. We need to allow people to convert existing properties into multifamily units. One of the things, and I know that this is kind of like controversial, but I think it's a real shame that back in the 1900s to the 1950s, things like boarding houses were far more common. And I think shared living arrangements, all those different things can actually be very valuable uses of a piece of property. And again, a lot of people that get priced out and find themselves being homeless, they might actually be able to afford or find stability in a rooming house. And again, I'm not saying that rooming houses will solve all of our problems, but I am saying the more units available, the more you allow existing homeowners and existing home stock to be split, subdivided, allow intensification through garden suites, carriage homes, whatever kind of nickname you want to give them. That's important. And yet think back, all these politicians that want to just throw money at the problem, how many of them, fought or don't like the idea of secondary dwellings in their own neighborhood, right? Like how many of them that live in a $600,000 $1 million plus property would lose their shit if someone tried to build a garden suite? Think about what Colby Marshall's going through right now, our realtor sponsor for the Barrie area, right? Literally, he's got people like, I won't get too deep into it, but you can go back, watch one of the old videos where he explains just an irate neighbor trying to make his life miserable and trying to turn the entire neighborhood against him because he dares to want to add a rental unit to the rental stock. It doesn't make sense. And these same people will complain about how housing's too expensive. We need to actually just intensify things. There's just no other silver bullet in my opinion. So a few things that I just wanted to highlight here, help renters become owners. This is that rent to own scheme we were talking about. And again, I'll let you guys look through it, but essentially, we will design the program to support projects with these three principles. The landlord must commit to charging a renter a lower than market rate to help Canadians build up savings for a down payment. This wasn't the rent to own one. This was just about it is. Under our plan, we will introduce a new rent to own program to help make it easier for renters to get on the path towards. So the landlord must commit to ownership in a 5-year term or less, and proper safeguards will be in place to protect the future homeowner. We already have rent-to-own providers. And so you know what this is actually going to happen, or in my humble opinion, what will happen if a program like this was to actually be executed? What's likely going to happen is 1 or 2 giant monopolies will creep up, the only ones capable of interacting with the federal government and being able to jump through all their hoops. And a lot of this $1 billion they're committed to is just going to disappear to overhead, to different departments and things of that nature. And then jumping back here, this idea of affording a down payment faster by creating a tax-free first home savings account to help young Canadians afford a down payment faster. You understand, if more people save up for a down payment, it's just going to mean more money chasing for the same number of properties. That's not a silver bullet in my humble opinion. And again, why 40,000? It represents roughly 5% of the average home price in Canada, 736,000. That doesn't solve anything. What's going to happen is people are just going to have $40,000 more to throw at it. So if I already had $40,000, I've got another $40,000. I can just throw my money at it. And again, this isn't actually going to solve anything, in my opinion. The more flexible first-time home buyer incentive, again, we can get into that, but it's not going to actually make a difference. This idea that they're going to allow mortgage postponements, reduce your monthly mortgage costs when you need it most. Again, in theory, that sounds great. But if someone can't afford their home, it's going to be rare that in Canada, it's rare that you get foreclosed upon like that, right? In fact, right now, we already have unusual circumstances. There's already certain forbearances or allowances there. And for a lot of individuals, it's not like they're going to be able to go find a better job. They're going to be able to just immediately plug themselves into a new system. I think that what this is just a scattershot, a spray and pray sort of position that the Liberals have taken. Again, several of these proposals are either directly from their competitors, the other parties, or they're things that in the last year they voted against or kind of changed their language on. So I guess I don't even like ranting about how angry I get at politicians these days. I don't think it's good for me. It's probably not good for you guys. But what I want to leave you with is the understanding that no politician's going to save you. No politician's going to make housing truly affordable. It's actually going to either happen at the local, regional level, where we're going to see real changes to zoning, where we're going to really see just the doors opened wide on allowing builders and developers to go crazy. Again, that in and of itself won't solve the affordability crisis. We still need to allow people to subdivide and intensify. So appreciate you guys watching this video. If you got value from it, smash the like button, hit subscribe. Let us know if you want to see us do more topical lives by commenting on this video, and we'll see you in the next one.